Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. I've been talking in this sort of series about different types of narcissistic relationships. You know about those narcissistic relationships you can't break out of because they're just sort of structurally like marriage or work, and there's lots of rules and expectations around them. Those are the ones we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about this idea of the structural narcissistic relationship. Some narcissistic relationships last a lifetime because they are embedded into a structure. Marriage or long-term committed relationship with children, family, business, or community/social relationships. And these may be some of the most problematic and perhaps abusive narcissistic relationships of all, because the narcissistic person derives their power from the social capital you will lose or the shame you might incur if you try to leave the relationship or you actually leave the relationship. These structural relationships, the structural narcissistic relationships, they're the ones that are the most sticky. It can be about legal issues, custody, finances. That's what makes these ones hard to break out of, but also culture and stigma. And frankly, a person may just not be able to afford to quit working or get out of a business partnership without it costing a fortune or losing years of work. And don't underestimate the narcissistic people that lurk in social spaces like religious communities, neighborhood groups, local politics, even homeowner associations. That's honestly its own video. I have seen people go to the edge of narcissistic madness as part of homeowner organizations, like if you live in a condo or something. The narcissist is able to lie, cheat, and deceive without thinking or caring because they don't care. They've projected all of their shame onto you. So they are just fine with their bad behavior and they have no empathy. So these structural relationships actually work for them. They do what they want. And if they do not want the relationship to end, it often does not, because it really does take some real fortitude or even masochism to walk away from a long-term relationship or family or workplace. And it may even be, in some cases, be relatively perilous for people. The narcissistic people count on the captive audience that these structural relationships bring. Narcissists are not only very controlling, they're also very rejection sensitive, and they struggle with abandonment issues. So if they do finally leave a relationship, they almost always have their plan B already set up. So it doesn't feel so abandonment-y for them, right? They already have a new setup to receive them and give them validation and a place that they can regulate themselves. That whole plan B model, that is a narcissistic person's go-round game. So what does this do to survivors? These structural narcissistic relationships are tough because they bring up so many issues. Some folks desperately want out and can't see an easy out. They can't afford the divorce, or they feel that sense of stigma around things like family estrangement. The complicated part about families, especially large families, is that you may actually like a few people in your family system, and most people aren't willing to blow it all up. In addition, I still think estrangement in a family is still viewed through a lens of public judgment and shaming, especially if a person in conversation says they're estranged from some or all of their family. Although we are witnessing more acceptance of estrangement and why it happens, it still remains a societal taboo. And the person who is accepting or even wants the estrangement, often because of narcissistic abuse, is the one who is often viewed more suspiciously. So if you are the one who goes no contact, you are viewed as the problem, not the other way around. The thing that I loathe about these codified and structured narcissistic relationships like marriage is that they are often the ones that keep people the most stuck, the most shamed, the most trauma bonded, and the most enabled. So, what do you do? As I think more about healing for survivors, I recognize that people need the tools to heal even if they stay in the relationship. It's a tough balancing act because it means lots of radical acceptance, awareness of trauma-bonded patterns, setting massive boundaries with enablers, almost as massive as the boundaries that we need to set with the narcissistic folks, and breaking out of the hope cycles. When you remain in one of these relationships or you remain in contact, you have to remind yourself. You almost have to hit yourself in the head and say, oh, that's right, this is toxic, especially on the good days, and how much the hope is like a narcotic that makes your judgment hazy. It's not easy because just being exposed to the ongoing narcissistic abuse in these relationships means that you are constantly hearing and experiencing terrible stuff. But these structural relationships mean we have to constantly remain aware of not blaming ourselves. These structural relationships pull for a lot of justification. People don't want to go through the headache of a divorce or be single again or not disrupt their children's lives, so they justify the behavior until they are a shell of themselves. People don't like the idea of not having a family to turn to or to miss out on the sense of belonging or on family events. So they tell themselves that all families have issues. Trust me, not like this. Narcissistic family systems are special circles of hell. I've witnessed families with just issues, and I've witnessed narcissistic families. There is a difference. People don't want to mess up long-term careers, mess up insurance benefits, or lose pensions or retirement funds, or obviously a salary, especially if you work in an industry that you've worked in for a long time or worked a long time to succeed in, or had to get a lot of education to be in, or that is just hard to break into. People will frame and justify these settings and the toxic relationships themselves as just being, well, a difficult hazing ritual or the nature of having a demanding boss. Community groups, religious groups, these are also tough, especially, for example, if you're a person of faith who likes being part of that kind of a community, and yet the structural part of the narcissism means you don't want to get out because you believe in something. This can all be really pronounced if you live in a small town or a more isolated area where these groups may be the only game in town, and without them, you stand the risk of becoming very lonely and isolated. People like belonging to something, even if it is a toxic relationship. And so these structural relationships can have some real staying power. I have witnessed people on the back end of dismantling these structural relationships. For example, horrible, expensive divorces, financial woes from workplace disruptions, and working within civil courts and painful distancing from families. And it is not easy. So these relationships represent a double bind of damned if you stay and damned if you leave. Many folks in these structural, codified, narcissistic relationships often opt to stay because it is easier than the anguish and the logistics, honestly, and the dismantling involved in leaving. I understand that. I really do. But if you do stay, that means you need to commit to not blaming yourself for another person's toxic behavior, radical acceptance, and recognizing that it's not going to change. These structural narcissistic relationships are tough, and for many folks who clear out a lot of other toxic people in their lives, these are the ones that often stick around and can really make healing difficult. Thanks again.